We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
The councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized up to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face, and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
Punch some people in the face!
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look, as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
This way. That's it right there. I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. It is the 5th of September, 2020, and we are 58 days away from the election. And as you can hear from that clip, it is the Democrats that have been pushing violence the whole time, all along, for a very long period of time. And what do we have in our streets right now, all over the country, but civil unrest and violence? And what can we expect for the future? More of the same, ladies and gentlemen. Now, after 97 days, they finally started condemning the violence. Because as we reported last week, the polls are not going in their favor. And that's the only thing that matters. We need to talk about the election today a little bit because I think everything is shaping up. They are shaping everything up to be a major crisis, a constitutional crisis in our country. And I think these are very, very serious times. Good morning, Vicky.
Good morning. That was an interesting recording that you had opening up.
Yeah. They are, it's a montage of the Democrats, and I don't like doing partisan politics. But today, more and more, we have no choice. The battle lines are being drawn, Vicky. I don't see this kind of corruption on the Republican side of things. I mean, there's corruption, to be sure, and they're as corrupt as the day is long. However, I don't see them promoting violence, and I do see the condemnation of violence. But really, this is not really a bipartisan thing anymore. Hasn't been for years. Certainly, probably not even in our lifetimes. Because
it used to be against the law to say things like that. In a public forum or public way, it's I don't know why they're getting away with it.
Well, the question, because the public aren't holding them accountable, that's why they're getting away with it. We have a lot of people who don't have a very much morality anymore.
Well, we have a Justice Department that's supposed to prosecute things like that. If it's a crime, if it's against the law, then, we can't do anything about it. It's the Justice Department.
Yeah, and anything the Justice Department does at this point, it's assuming that they're on the right side of things, anything that they do will be viewed as political. I think the biggest problem for our side, for the side of sanity, really, I mean, because it's not a matter of Republican, Democrat, conservative versus liberal. I think the biggest problem that we have is that the establishment has control of the media. And the establishment media is not on the side of preserving our country and, for that matter, preserving civility. And I'm looking at an article right now at Mediaite. Democrat pollster predicts a huge Trump win on election night, but says Biden will end up winning within a week. It has become very clear now that regardless of how the outcome, the Democrats, as I see it, have two plans, Plan A and Plan B for the election. Plan A is to get Joe Biden elected regardless of how they do it. Massive voter fraud absolutely can be expected, no question about it. But failing that, and there's a very good chance it will fail because, as we've covered many times and everybody has talked about, Joe Biden is not really a viable candidate. He fondles women everywhere he goes. He's raped women. I mean, let's just put it all out there. I mean, Tara Reid comes to mind. But all you have to do is look at all the videos that are all over the internet of him touching and feeling and kissing. And, I mean, the guy is out of control. And now the Secret Service has come out. The Secret Service has come out and said that there was actually a fight, almost a fight between one of the Secret Service agents because they were hosting some sort of a deal, I forget, some kind of party or something. And Joe Biden was very inappropriate with the guy's wife. And the Secret Service agent had to be restrained to keep from punching then Vice President Joe Biden. So this guy's totally out of control. He is not a viable candidate. And yet this seems to be the best the Democrats can come up with. But they have not put forth any talking points that are anything but Trump hate, anything but fear-mongering. The leftists, the people on the left, the people who are Democrats, have not really gotten anything. The party, normally during a convention you say, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're about. You don't get any of that from them. All you get is Trump hate. That's all they have. And now with all of this civil unrest, even people I think who are moderately Democrat are seeing all this stuff. You don't want riots in your neighborhood. You don't want people breaking things and tearing things down. You want it to stop. And there is no condemnation of violence until 98 days. 98 days of nonstop rioting, looting, arson, and violence. But now, because the polls have turned a little toward Trump, now all of a sudden Biden finds his voice.
The senseless violence of looting and burning and destruction of property. I want to make it absolutely clear, something very clear about all of this. Rioting is not protesting. Looting is not protesting. Setting fires is not protesting. None of this is protesting. It's lawlessness, plain and simple. And those who do it should be prosecuted. Violence will not bring change. It will only bring destruction. It's wrong in every way. It divides instead of unites. Destroys businesses, only hurts the working families that serve the community. It makes things worse across the board, not better. No, it's not what Dr. King or John Lewis taught, and it must end. Fires are burning, and we have a president who fans the flames rather than fighting the flames. But we must not burn. We have to build.
Okay, so now it's somehow Trump's fault. And that's the other part of the strategy here. Is, 98 days, and they finally condemn the violence, and now it's somehow Trump's fault.
Yeah, I don't know how people can do that. To just turn it around and blame somebody else. I could never do that. How do they do that?
Well, the question is, how do they expect anybody to believe it? I mean, do they think that we're that stupid that we're not? They just say that it's Trump's fault and we're going to believe it?
Maybe their constituents are that dumb.
I don't know. Maybe some of them, but I find it hard to believe, except that you have diehard people. I mean, their base, the people that are, committed no matter what to the ticket, I guess are going to go for it. But I can't imagine them being swayed by anybody. Here's a new Biden campaign ad, though.
This election will decide whether we save the American dream. We must never allow mob rule.
17-year-old being held on suspicion of first-degree intentional homicide.
Free rein to violent anarchists and criminals.
The El Paso shooting was the deadliest attack at the hands of a white supremacist in the U.S. in 50 years.
We must always have law and order.
Tear gas was used to remove peaceful protesters from Lafayette Park.
A St. Louis couple brandishing firearms against protesters.
The greatest economy in history.
The U.S. lost more than 20 million jobs just in the month of April, making it the worst jobs report on record.
We will crush the virus.
Total cases in the U.S. now top 5.8 million. The virus has killed more than 179,000.
No one will be safe in Biden's America.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. When it opened, Trump says we must never allow mob rule. It shows shots of Charlottesville. Going back to his comments, which has been often, they often refer to Trump's comments about there are many fine people on both sides, and there were many fine people on both sides. He was talking about the people that were there to protest the removal of the statue, but they're using it as the people who are the neo-Nazis that were there, which are, I'm sure, COINTELPRO type of operators.
I'm absolutely positive of it. Same thing happened at Malheur.
Yeah. So, anyway...
I'm still finding out the various levels of conspiracy that were going on there that I wasn't even aware of.
Wow.
I thought it was just a rally. It's quite amazing, actually, in hindsight.
Yeah, are you talking about Charlottesville or the...
No, Malheur. But
okay.
The same thing applies to any group of people protesting. There are different groups of people that are there for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the white supremacists who were at Charlottesville, it was probably a very small group, probably not really connected to most of the other people, not known to most of the other people.
Yeah, and I hate that term white supremacist because we don't know what their motivations are.
That's true. That's true, but that's what they call them.
That's what they call them, but the media I think we almost have to take back the narrative, because the media, they invent these terms. You know, everyone's a white supremacist. Mm-hmm. And that's just it, you know. But it could just be very militant people who are determined to defend the rights of people, defend the white people. You know, the problem is that you invite this type of thing. You invite this type of violence. Excuse me, I had to clear my throat. You invite this type of violence, the more you disenfranchise any group.
Yeah, that's true. You're right.
You know, and that's exactly what they're doing. But this ad says, you know, Trump says we must not allow mob rule. It shows the shots of Charlottesville, completely ignoring the other violence that the Democrats have allowed and fostered, and you know. Then they cut to Kyle Rittenhouse, who was arrested for defending himself, again, from the Democrats' violence. And the cognitive dissonance over this stuff is just remarkable. It's mind-blowing how you can look at that scene in the street and turn it around into anything other than what it was. Then they got Trump saying free reign to violent anarchists, and the scene cut to shots of Massachusetts shooting events, you know, mass shooting events, which implies that gun control is needed. The statement that tear gas was used to remove peaceful protesters, that's just bogus. They put the words, you know, on the screen, a president inflaming violence. The media has been calling these violent mobs mostly peaceful protesters since this whole thing began. You know, if they were really peaceful, they wouldn't have been tear-gassed. And then they use the McCloskeys in the ad, too, who are being persecuted for nothing more than just defending themselves against violent mobs promoted by the Democrats.
I just remembered something I heard on the radio last night on ACLJ, the American...
Yes, Center for Law and Justice.
Yeah, I think it was them. They said that Kevin Rittenhouse or Kyle Rittenhouse has $1 million in his defense fund. Oh, maybe it wasn't that program, but anyway, he's got $1 million for his.
No,
defense.
Thanks to Facebook, they just shut, or it wasn't. Let's see, I think it was Facebook that blocked anybody from posting a link to his defense fund.
Yeah, apparently there's another website that is doing the same GoFundMe type function, but it's for people on the right.
It's a Christian site, and I think the credit card providers, one of the credit card providers for that service, just disavowed them. Just very much the same way what they did with Gab, the social media site for free speech, which welcomes everybody, by the way, not just people on the right. So it's a full-court press. Silicon Valley has declared war on all of us. They've declared war on free speech and civility. They've declared war on everything decent, really. Mm-hmm. It's just remarkable how this all is coming into view, and it's forming a very ugly picture, you know. And I talked before about Biden not being a viable candidate. You know, here he was just this week. He was talking about, just listen to what he has to say about history.
We gotta, for example, why in God's name don't we teach history in history classes? A black man invented the light bulb, not a white guy named Edison. Okay? There's so much. Did anybody know before what's recently happened? That Black Wall Street in Oklahoma was burned to the ground? Anybody know these things? We act because we don't teach them. We got to give people facts.
Facts.
Teach them what's out there.
Facts, even if they're not true.
Yeah, I had a woman on Facebook try to tell me that, you know, the sagebrush out here where I live, apparently it's called Russian sagebrush. So she tried to tell me that back in the 800s there was like a McHale sagebrush, like Johnny Appleseed, who brought seeds of sagebrush to the United States and spread it all around the West. And I said, have you really thought about what you're saying there? Why would he do that? It's a long trip. It's a long, hard trip.
He had nothing better to do.
You can't eat sagebrush. It has no value. And I don't think we were in any kind of Cold War with the Ruskies back in the 1800s.
No, but if the neocons have their way, we will be again. I mean, they've dusted that meme off. It didn't really have a chance to get dust because we have been living the last 4 years Russian phobia everywhere. It's Russia, Russia, Russia. And they certainly have brought that right back out for the 2020 election, even though it's been thoroughly discredited. It's incredible. And they just think this stuff is going to keep sticking, you know. In the meantime, here's another clip of Biden giving you some profound truth, Vicky.
And stop your boast about never being seen at what you can do anything. You always talk about your ability to negotiate.
There you go. Did you get that?
No, he said.
That's the idea.
You always talk about your ability to negotiate. Is that what he said?
Yes.
Oh.
So, yeah, he's just speaking gibberish.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's coming down to the point where, I mean, Biden is not really the candidate. Kamala Harris is the candidate, and the deep state is the candidate. I mean, that's what's really, if they can get him in there, they intend to run the things from the back seat. That's what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Except I don't think that Joe is cognizant enough to really pull off even just being a stooge.
Well, I don't think it's an act. I think he's just being himself.
I don't think it's an act either. But I don't see how he has enough ability left to really play a decent frontman. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you on that. But what they'll probably do is they'll keep him in the basement, make a very few appearances as possible, and they'll just hide him out. They'll just hide him out as best they can. I don't know. A lot of people will say, well, they'll bring out the clones or something.
Oh, yeah, the lookalike.
Yeah, the lookalike. That thing will make a resurface. But I wanted to come back to this issue, though, of the election itself. I'm very concerned about what I'm seeing, Vicky, more and more. As I mentioned the Mediaite article, the Democratic pollster predicts a huge win for Trump on election night, but says Biden will end up winning within a week. What it seems like that they are planning on doing, Plan A is to get Joe Biden elected regardless of what happens. Anyway, by any means necessary. Failing that, and it is likely to fail, Plan B is that regardless of the outcome of the election, they're going to challenge it in court. I mean, regardless of whether regardless of whether the outcome of the election is, what I mean is whether it's a close win for Trump or a large margin, a landslide, they're going to find a reason, they're going to invent a reason to challenge the election in court. And as a result of that, the plan is to keep Trump from continuing in office past January 20th. Because
I wish I had more faith in John Roberts.
I have no faith in John Roberts.
Yeah, he's let us down just about every decision.
Yes. And the 20th Amendment, of course, says, and I'll just read it, the terms of the president and vice president shall end at noon on the 20th day of January, and the terms of senators and representatives at noon on the 3rd day of January of the years in which such terms would have ended if this article had not been ratified, and the terms of their successors shall begin. So what the plan seems to be is that they're going to challenge this thing in court for, past January 20th, and then put the country into a constitutional crisis because they're going to say Trump is not a legitimate president that his term is expired, and the goal is to have Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, since we don't have a clear, quote-unquote, a clear outcome, an accepted outcome to the election.
They can't put her in. I don't see how they could possibly put her in. They would have to declare martial law.
Yes.
And have the military take over.
And you don't think that that's something that they would try to do? They're already laying the groundwork for this.
Well, they might try it, but there is no succession for a situation where the election is contested. I don't see how they could do that, because the succession is in case of death or disability of the president, not a court case that prohibits the elected president from being inaugurated.
I think
I have to see the wording on that amendment. That's interesting. I don't think they can do it.
Well, I just read it to you. Let me read it again. The terms of the president. This is Article 20. The 20th Amendment. The terms of the president and vice president shall end at noon on the 20th day of January, and the terms of senators and representatives at noon on the 3rd day of January of the years in which such terms would have ended if this article had not been ratified, and the terms of their successors shall then begin. So it's not clear. It's not clear. But
right, because Nancy Pelosi is not a successor.
She is in the line of
that spells out the succession.
Right, and that's a good point. She is in the line of succession, but this is an area that it's just been accepted that people understand. If you win an election, you take over.
Right.
But in this case, we are not in normal times. And they're using everything that they can to try to throw us into constitutional uncertainty. Let me share with you. Well, first, let me go to this. Just to back up what I'm saying, because it's very clear this is what they're looking at doing. Hillary Clinton's already making the rounds. She did an interview on Showtime's The Circus. The program's called The Circus.
She travels with her own.
Very appropriately named The Circus. As usual, they project onto others that which they're doing themselves. Listen to what she says here.
We are living this horror film right now, pandemic, this, racial reckoning. They're literally tear gassing citizens.
They're literally tear gassing citizens. Now, hold on a second. I got to stop it right there. Are they literally tear gassing citizens?
No, they're tear gassing criminals.
They're tear gassing people that are out looting, breaking things, starting fires, committing arsons and acts of violence against other citizens. So, they're literally tear gassing citizens, is what she says.
And yet, Trump is still formidable.
The dark can scare people and force them to seek refuge or security from the kind of authoritarian leader that Trump is showing himself to be. The only way they can win is by either suppressing or stopping voting, or outright intimidating people into feeling that they have to go with the strong guy to stand up against all these threats that Trump is going to gin up to scare people. I loved.
Okay, I got to stop it again. I hate to keep stopping it, but what does he have to gin up? What threat does he have to gin up? All you have to do is turn on the news. I mean, for that matter, turn on your leftist networks and take a look at some of the stuff that's burning in the streets in various cities across this country. Nobody has to gin anything up. I mean, it's just right there in your face. Anyone, if you have a pulse and any cognizant ability at all, you can see what's going on.
I loved hearing Joe Biden talking about bringing people together and leading us into the light. But, it's a battle.
That's creepy.
And fear is really powerful.
Yeah, fear is really powerful because you guys are using it all the time. Yeah, I don't really like the sound of that leading us. Joe Biden's going to lead us into the light.
Yeah, I don't like that at all.
Sounds very, very new agey to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now here's where she reveals the plan. Listen carefully to every word here.
Look, it's going to be a close election. As I said in my speech, you can win 3 million more votes and still, not get elected because of the Electoral College. It all comes down to the Electoral College.
If it's a close election, like say Biden, say Biden wins, what do you think Trump will do?
Look, I think that they have a couple of scenarios that they're looking toward. One is messing up absentee balloting.
Right, of course.
They believe that helps them. So that they then get maybe a narrow advantage in the Electoral College on Election Day. Because remember, we've seen a couple of cases, like in Wisconsin, where they did everything they could to mess up voting. But because courts had ordered absentee ballots to be counted if they were postmarked on Election Day, Democrats actually won some important races there. In the recent Michigan primary, I was told in Detroit, the Republicans had 40 lawyers challenging absentee mail-in voting, and a local reporter talking to one of the lawyers he knew was told it was a dry run for November. So we've got to have a massive legal operation. I know the Biden campaign is working on that. We have to have poll workers, and I urge people who are able to be a poll worker. We have to have our own teams of people to counter the force of intimidation that the Republicans and Trump are going to put outside polling places. This is a big organizational challenge, but at least we know more about what they're going to do. And, Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances, because I think this is going to drag out. And eventually, I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch and if we are as focused and relentless as the other side is.
There you go.
The only people I've ever seen intimidate anybody outside of a polling place was the Black Panthers.
Yes, I remember that. And in fact, I thought of the same thing when she said that.
Mm-hmm.
But she said...
And that was just 1 year out of my whole entire lifetime, that ever happened.
Yeah, it wasn't but as I said, they project onto other people what they do themselves. Mm-hmm. But she said it right there. We have to have a legal team. We have to be ready. And she's talking about how Joe Biden shouldn't concede under any circumstances. Now, this is, this. I want to share with you an article that was written by Whitney Webb. Whitney Webb is a very, very credible investigative journalist. And she has an article out called Bipartisan Washington Insiders Reveal Their Plan for Chaos If Trump Wins the Election. This is very important, Vicky, because this is a coup d'etat. What they have been working on for the last 4 years is an attempt to overthrow a duly elected president of the United States. And I know it sounds, again, I have to put in the disclaimer, it sounds like I'm this big, huge Trump fan, big pro-Trump. No, I don't like a lot of the stuff Trump has done. But he is the duly elected president of the United States. And they have been trying for 4 years, both Republicans and Democrats have been teaming up, the establishment. Their establishment. As a matter of fact, you know what I found out the other day? Rick Snyder, I used to call him Red Rick on this broadcast because he loved to go to communist China. Rick Snyder, the former Republican governor of the state of Michigan, has just come out and endorsed Joe Biden.
I watched a video. There's a new video out about Biden and the whole history with China, and it was done by the same guy who did the video Clinton Cash.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'll get you the link to that because it's really good, and it gives the history of his son and Joe Biden over in China. It's like Biden is a stooge of
China.
Yeah,
and that's very important, and it would make a lot of sense in the world that Republican Rick Snyder would be endorsing Democrat Joe Biden when you consider that they have that in common.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're both establishment wonks. They're both establishment shills, really. And I think it's interesting, some of the, even the think tank that you sent me last night, which I took some clips from. Hopefully we'll have time to get to it. But, they're talking a lot about some of the same things. It's very clear that the globalists, the establishment globalists, do not want things to continue the way they are. And they're just about ready to burn the country. I mean, they are burning the country, literally. But they're just about ready to destroy everything. Not even have a semblance of maintaining the United States. But
well, you know what, I just discovered this morning. I don't know how much of this kind of thing Trump has done that they just haven't talked about. But Trump got rid of the globalist health security people in his administration, and he moved the preparedness stuff for a pandemic into a different department. I have an article somewhere here about that, but that really surprised me. That's an article that I did last week that I just posted a couple days ago has to do with the collaborative development of global systems that our government engaged in during the Clinton administration.
Mm-hmm.
And global health was one of those systems. Now, when I say back in the Clinton administration, that doesn't mean it's over and done with. It means by this time, since they started it back then, it's mushroomed. And I'm kind of thinking that perhaps China was very involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of different reasons. But Trump dismantled that whole thing, which is why apparently the Democrats are saying he wasn't prepared for the pandemic. He hasn't handled things well.
Yeah,
it's because he disrupted and disabled that global connection.
Yeah, well,
which I think is a fabulous thing.
Absolutely, and there are things that he has done that have been good. I mean, and we tend to overlook it here because we focus. Look, I look at my role in the alternative media as doing the role that the mainstream media should be doing, talking about substantive issues, talking about things. If Trump does something wrong, I'm going to call him out for it. And he has done things wrong. He has betrayed us in many ways. But that being said, there are good things that he's done too. And I do think the establishment doesn't like him being there because he's not going along with their entire program. And I think they want somebody in there that they can control, that they can work with. Trump's independent-minded. He does his own thing. If it can be pitched to him that in a way that it makes sense to him, maybe he'll go along with it. But he's also a wild card, kind of a loose cannon that can't be predicted. And so they don't want somebody in there that thinks for himself and does things in a way that may not favor globalism. And certainly some of the pullback from China, that I think that was one of the major reverses, the foreign policy reverses. They wanted the continuation of this cozy relationship with communist China, because it was working very well in the realm of globalism. And they wanted a continuation of the animosity with Russia, which unfortunately they have gotten. They've successfully been able to bully him and into not having better relations with Russia. But I want to share this article from Whitney Webb, Vicky, so if you'll bear with me, because I think it's that important. Bipartisan Washington insiders reveal their plan for chaos if Trump wins the election. Now, again, Whitney Webb is an investigative reporter. She's very credible. If somebody else had written this, I might have blown it off because it is that far out there. But she says, a group of Democratic Party insiders and former Obama and Clinton-era officials, as well as a cadre of never-Trump neoconservative Republicans, have spent the past few months conducting simulations and war games regarding different 2020 election doomsday scenarios. Per several media reports on the group is called the Transition Integrity Project, or TIP. Now, just listen to that. Just think about this. You name a group, Transition Integrity Project. Talk about Orwellian. You know, that the name itself, first of all, if Trump gets reelected, there's not going to be any transition. Okay? So the whole idea that there would be a transition, here you got these group of shadowy people coming out, and they're going to ensure that there's a transition. The Transition Integrity Project, or TIP. Was
the guy who did the modeling for the different scenarios for transition, was he recently on Axios? Talking about his projections, his scenarios? That I don't know, but possibly. That would have been interesting. Do you have video? Maybe we could clip it for next week. Yeah, I'll find it. I didn't have it ready, but I hadn't seen the Axios stuff. It sounds like a video that I did watch. Okay. By Axios. Well, Whitney continues. She says they justify these exercises as specifically preparing for a scenario where President Trump loses the 2020 election and he refuses to leave office, potentially resulting in a constitutional crisis. However, according to TIP's own documents, even their simulations involving a clear win, quote-unquote, for Trump in the upcoming election resulted in a constitutional crisis, as they predicted that the Biden campaign would make bold moves aimed at securing the presidency regardless of the election result. And again, we just played you audio from Hillary Clinton saying that Biden shouldn't concede no matter what. She continues. She said, this is particularly troubling given that the Transition Integrity Project has considerable ties to the Obama administration, where Biden served as vice president, as well as several groups that are adamantly pro-Biden, in addition to the Biden campaign itself. Indeed, the fact that a group of openly pro-Biden Washington insiders and former government officials have gamed out scenarios for possible election outcomes and their aftermath, all of which either ended with Biden becoming president or a constitutional crisis, suggests that powerful forces influencing the Biden campaign are pushing the former vice president to refuse to concede the election even if he loses. And there can be no doubt about that, because we just played you the audio. And as a matter of fact, I've got another one. I'll play it here in a minute. She said this more than one time. So they continue. They say this of course gravely undercuts TIP's claim to be ensuring quote unquote integrity in the presidential transition process, and instead suggests that the group is openly planning on how to ensure that Trump leaves office regardless of the result, or to manufacture the very constitutional crisis they claim to be preventing through their simulations. Such concerns are only magnified by the recent claim made by the 2016 presidential election candidate and former Secretary of State under Obama, Hillary Clinton, as I just played you, that Biden should not concede under any circumstances. I'll skip that part because you just heard it. Now, members of the TIP met in June to conduct 4 war games that simulated a dark 11 weeks, and this is a quote, a dark 11 weeks between Election Day and Inauguration Day, in which Trump and his Republican allies
used every apparatus of government, the Postal Service, state lawmakers, the Justice Department, federal agents, and the military to hold on to power, and Democrats took to the courts and the streets to try to stop it, according to a report from the Boston Globe. However, one of those simulations, which examined what would transpire between Election Day and Inauguration Day in the event of a clear Trump win, shows that the TIP simulated not only how Republicans could use every option at their disposal to hold on to power, but also how Democrats could do so if the 2020 election result is not in their favor. While some mostly right-leaning media outlets, such as this article from the National Pulse, did note that TIP simulations involved the Biden campaign refusing to concede, the actual document from TIP on the exercises revealed the specific moves the Biden campaign would take following a clear win for the Trump campaign. Unsurprisingly, these moves would greatly exacerbate current political tensions in the United States, an end result that the TIP claims they were created to avoid, gravely undercutting the official justification for their simulations as well as the group's official reason for existing. In the TIP's clear Trump win scenario, Joe Biden played in the war game by John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign manager, and, so here you got John Podesta in there playing Joe Biden in these simulations, very close to Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton coming out and saying Biden shouldn't concede under any circumstances. Yeah, she knows the plan, and she's tipping off everybody of what's to come. He's not going to concede. So, anyway, Biden is played by John Podesta, Hillary's former campaign manager, and chief of staff to former President Bill Clinton. Biden retracted his election night concession in the scenario, in the role-playing exercise. He retracts his election night concession and subsequently convinced 3 states with Democratic governors, those states are North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Michigan, to ask for recounts. Then the governors of Wisconsin and Michigan sent separate slates of electors to counter those sent by the state legislature to the Electoral College, which Trump had won, in an attempt to undermine, if not prevent, that win. Next, the Biden campaign encouraged Western states, particularly California, but also Oregon and Washington, to collectively known as Cascadia, to secede from the Union, unless congressional Republicans agreed to a set of structural reforms. Subsequently, with advice from former President Obama, the Biden campaign laid out those quote-unquote reforms as the following. Number 1, give statehood to Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. Number 2, divide California into 5 states to more accurately reflect or represent its population in the Senate, unquote. Number 3, require Supreme Court justices to retire at 70. Number 4, eliminate the Electoral College. In other words, these structural reforms involve the creation of what essentially amounts to having the U.S. by composed 56 states, with the new states set to ensure a perpetual majority for Democrats, as only Democrat majority areas, D.C., Puerto Rico, and California, are given statehood. Notably, in other scenarios where Biden won the Electoral College, Democrats did not support its elimination. Also notable is the fact that in this simulation, the Transition Integrity Project blamed the Trump administration for the Democrats' decision to take the provocative and unprecedented actions laid out above, asserting that Trump's campaign had created the conditions to force the Biden campaign into these actions by doing things like giving an interview to The Intercept in which Trump, stated that he would have lost the election if Bernie Sanders had been nominated instead of Biden as the Democratic presidential candidate. The TIP also claimed that the Trump campaign would seek to paint these provocative, unprecedented actions as the Democrats attempting to orchestrate an illegal coup. Yeah? Despite the fact that it is essentially what those actions entail. Indeed, in other simulations where the Trump campaign behaved along these lines, the TIP's rhetoric about this category of extreme actions is decidedly different. I don't know how much. Let me skip down here to who is behind the TIP. And again, the TIP Transition Integrity Project. This group that's holding simulations, or has held simulations for the past, I think they said, 4 months. So the TIP was created in 2019, allegedly out of concern that the Trump administration may seek to manipulate, ignore, undermine, or disrupt the 2020 presidential election and transition process. It was co-founded by Rosa Brooks and Nils Gilman, and its current director is Zoe Hudson. Brooks, as previously mentioned, was an advisor to the Pentagon and the Hillary-led State Department during the Obama administration. She was also previously the general counsel to the president. Here you go. She was also previously the general counsel to the president of the Open Society Institute, part of the Open Society Foundations, a controversial organization. I think we know who that is. So George Soros. Zoe Hudson, who is TIP's director, is also former top figure at the Open Society Foundation, serving as senior policy analyst and liaison between the foundations and the U.S. government for 11 years. Open Society ties to the TIP are a red flag for a number of reasons, namely due to the fact that OSF and other Soros-funded organizations played a critical role in fomenting so-called color revolutions to overthrow non-aligned governments. And we know all about the Arab Spring and Ukraine in 2014. We've talked a lot about that on this broadcast. Subsequent leaked emails reveal the cozy ties between Soros and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, including one email where Soros directed Clinton's policy with respect to unrest in Albania, telling her the two things that need to be done urgently, which were to bring the full weight of the international community to bear on Prime Minister Berisha and appoint a senior European official as mediator. Both urgent tasks were subsequently performed by Clinton, presumably at Soros's behest. Anyway, skipping down, they talk about, Whitney Webb talks about, aside from Brooks and other co-founders of TIP, is Nils Gilman is also involved. He's the current vice president of programs at the Berggruen Institute. That's Berggruen. Berggruen Institute, and prior to that, worked for Salesforce, a major tech and government contractor. Gilman is particularly focused on artificial intelligence and transhumanism, Vicky. Recently telling the New York Times that his work at the Berggruen Institute is focused on, quote, building a transnational network of philosophers, technologists, policymakers, artists who are thinking about how AI and its gene editing are transfiguring what it means to be human. Nicholas Berggruen, for whom the Berggruen Institute is named, is part of the billionaire-led faction along Blackstone's Stephen Schwarzman and Eric Schmidt, who seek to develop AI and the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution, in conjunction with the political leaders and economic elite of China. Their
scientific management of people and the planet. That defines the post-human world.
Yes. And this looks to me like this is a technocratic revolution that's taking place here. They intend to use the 2020 election as a springboard to launch the coup d'etat against our system of government so that they can put forth their technocratic replacement. That's the likelihood to me. I mean, they've been working on this, as you know, for many, many years.
Yeah, let me tell you what I found. I'm really excited that I found this. I found the recordings of Will Roberts. I don't know if you remember Will Roberts or not.
Yeah.
But he did a series of radio programs on Freedom 21 Radio, Santa Cruz, where he talked about the philosopher Auguste Comte and positivism, and followed by logical positivism. And what he described, I just listened to it again this morning, is exactly the technocratic type takeover of the world, turning sociology into a hard science, as if you can manage people under rules in the same way that the rules of nature work, like gravity or, all the scientific type principles. That's what he had an idea to do, and that philosophy has carried forward, through all these years, and it's just amazing. I'll make sure to give you the link for that.
Okay.
And I really hope that people go listen to them. Listen to those programs.
All right, we have to take this hard break here at the top of the hour. I'm sorry to read so much, but I just think this is very, very important. And Whitney is a very credible journalist, as I said. And I know she's not making any of this up. It's all documentable. In fact, you said you heard your own interview on Axios. It'd be interesting to get that link. But anyway,
I'll
folks,
see if I can find it.
They are this is a deep state coup d'etat. That's the bottom line. They're going to overthrow the election, and they're going to overthrow our country if they get their way.
And the deep state are the technocrats.
Yep, we'll be back.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order. New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
The councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is the second hour of Govern America. It's going to fly by today. We have a lot to talk about. It continues to be the 5th of September 2020 as we are documenting the coup d'etat against our country by the deep state technocrats that want to overthrow Trump. But it's really not about Trump. It's about our country and the constitutional rule of law, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, that's really what's at stake right now, as we're sharing information from the Transition Integrity Project and Whitney Webb's outstanding article on unlimitedhangout.com. Vicky, I wanted to share a little bit about this, but before, who's behind this Transition Integrity Project? But before I do, let me just go first to a clip from Hillary and Bill Clinton. After the initial interview that I played a clip from before where she's telling Biden not to concede under any circumstances, she was also interviewed in an Instagram interview with April Ryan. April Ryan, who calls herself an objective journalist, yet she spent the whole interview gushing over the Clintons. It was really sickening. But Hillary repeated her admonishment to Joe Biden that he should not concede. They're clearly laying the groundwork for a constitutional crisis here.
And to see where we are today after the first black president and after all of the changes that are happening in our country and in the world, to see what we are now confronted by. But, it's often darkest before the first light. And I think we all have to believe that we can move forward if we're willing to exercise our basic constitutional right. I mean, I think of John Lewis every day, April. I mean, our dear, dear friend. And
good trouble.
Oh, my God. We're going to get into good trouble because we are going to do everything we know to do to get everybody out to vote, to persuade them to vote, to get those votes counted. And, I gave an interview the other day, and I said my advice to Joe Biden, and I've told the campaign this, obviously, is do not concede under any circumstances, because I believe the other side is going to cheat and sneak and try to do everything.
If he loses, he's not going to leave if he loses.
And so we're going to be resolved, and we're going to be strong, and we're going to be on that front line, and we're going to get our country back. That's our plan.
President Clinton just laughed, because can you imagine? And I say this all the time. I got in trouble again on CNN. I said, there's going to be a split screen on January 20th at 12 noon, 2021. Joe Biden is going to be accepting or doing the inauguration. What is it? Giving the oath, the inauguration. Yes, that thing that y'all been through twice. He's going to be doing that, and then there's going to be a split screen. You're going to see the military going in to pull this man who's going to orange knuckle the resolute desk. But then I try to get President Clinton. I just love you.
Well, I was just thinking, he probably won't even come to Biden's inauguration. He'd be stacking sandbags in front of the White House.
Oh, he won't. Right. So before we go, I've got two things. I thank you both so much for coming. I've got two things. My children want to say hello. My 18-year-old who just voted.
I just left that part in at the end because this shows how she's gushing over them. It's and for her to call herself an objective journalist is just it's worse than a sick joke. But
yeah, it's contra reality.
Yeah, like everything they do. But there you have it again. I mean, they're laying out the plan, laying the groundwork for this coup d'etat. And this is a coup d'etat. Now, I think you'll find it interesting, Vicky, who's behind this transition integrity project. They say, Whitney Webb says, while the identities of the TIP's founders and current director have been made public, they have been made public. The full member list of the TIP has not. However, the TIP's sister organization, called the National Task Force on Election Crises, I've never even heard of this group. The National Task Force on Election Crises. This is a sister group for the Transition Integrity Project.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
They do have a public membership list, and several of its members, Whitney says, are also known to be part of the TIP. Some of these overlapping members include, here's some of the overlapping members, Michael Chertoff, former head of the Department of Homeland Security.
Michael.
Right. Michael Steele, former chairman of the RNC, and Lawrence Wilkerson, chief of staff to former Secretary of State Colin Powell. Chertoff, Steele, and Wilkerson, though Republicans, are part of the so-called Never Trump Republican faction, as are the TIP's other known Republican members. Thus, the quote-unquote bipartisan nature of TIP may be accurate in terms of party affiliation. All known TIP members, regardless of party, are united in their opposition to another term for the current president. There's also other known members of the TIP include David Frum of The Atlantic, William Crystal, Project for a New American Century, and The Bulwark, Max Boot, The Washington Post, Donna Brazile, ex-DNC, and, of course, John Podesta, as we've already talked about, Chuck Hagel, former Secretary of Defense, and Reed Gallen, co-founder of the Lincoln Project.
Chuck Hagel was an investor, as I recall, was an investor in one of the computerized voting systems. I would say that all of those people were involved in the global systems. I hate to call it a project because it's so much bigger than a project. It's people committing treason as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, I agree. Well, this whole thing is treasonous.
Integrating our government systems
sedition
with other governments.
Yeah. Then there's
building
also
a global system, just like we've talked about for years, building a global system of governance.
Yeah, there's also Norm Ornstein from the American Enterprise Institute. Whitney says, of their known members, the most outspoken is Lawrence Wilkerson, who has fashioned himself as the group's unofficial spokesperson, having done the majority. Maybe that's who you heard on that Axios interview. I'm not sure.
No, I did find it, by the way. It will be in the show notes.
Okay, very good. I'm looking forward to seeing that. The most outspoken Lawrence Wilkerson, he has said he's fashioned himself as the unofficial spokesperson, having done the majority of media interviews promoting the group and its war games. In an interview in late June with journalist Paul Jay, Wilkerson notes that the TIP lacks transparency and that aside from their war games, their other activities are largely confidential. He specifically stated that there is some confidentiality about what we agreed to, and what we put out publicly, and who's responsible for that, and other aspects of our doing that. The Transition Integrity Project is, to this point, very, very close, whole, and confidential. In that same interview, Wilkerson also noted that the current combination of events involving the recent unrest in several U.S. cities, the coronavirus crisis, the national debate over the future of policing, the economic recession, and the 2020 election was the foundation for a revolution in the U.S. He told Jay that, quote, I want to say this is how things like 1917 in Russia, like 1979 in Tehran, and like 1789 in France. This is how these sort of things get started. So we've got to be very careful about how we deal with these things. And that worries me because we don't have a very careful individual in the White House.
We don't have a very responsible opposition party either. So we're in a mess.
Yeah, they're planning it's very clear. They're planning the very thing to take this country down. This isn't about Trump, and this is why I hate to read so much. I hate to spend so much time on an election because ordinarily I'm like, yeah, okay, elections, blah, blah, blah. But this isn't any ordinary election, Vicky. They have every intention of a coup d'etat, and it's not just against the administration, but it's against the whole country. They're going to have their way, and it doesn't matter what the voters say. It doesn't matter what anybody says. This is the deep state's rebellion, the deep state's, what do you want to call it? Treason? Sedition?
Sedition,
I think it's
for sure.
Certainly sedition against our country and an overthrow of its government. When they're talking about seceding, and there'll be some Americans that... If Oregon and Washington State wanted to secede, there would be some Americans that would say, yeah, by all means, California, Oregon, Washington, goodbye. But
yeah, I don't say that.
I don't say it either because I think that's been the plan for years.
That I have documentation to show that this was strategically planned. It's been planned. They've been working on it for a long time. So how is it that Trump can't stop it by arresting all of these people for sedition? If I have documentation that this was the strategic direction, certainly they do. They have it too.
Well,
within the government, they have more than I do.
There's limits, I think, to what Trump can do. I think Trump
he can call a military martial law.
Yeah, but then in a way, he plays right into their hands if he does that, because they're already saying that he's a dictator. You know, from day one, even before he took office, they were calling him Hitler. They were calling him a dictator. They were saying he wasn't going to leave if he gets in there. I mean, they've really laid the foundation to, and it's just, honestly, it's Fox News too. How he ever thought Fox News is his friend.
At some point, somebody's got to stop catering to the idiocy of these people on the left and say, we're not playing this game anymore. Game over.
Yeah, and that includes the media.
People
have got to quit.
It does include the media.
You know, but part of the conspiracy theory about all of this stuff is this mailbox thing. This is another example of them laying the groundwork for this coup d'etat to challenge the election.
Say it directly. Is this an attempt by the president, do you believe, to interfere in the election?
Absolutely.
That are choking the post office, slowing it down.
They will destroy the Postal Service. They'll do it because they don't want people to vote.
This is nothing but a naked power grab to make sure that he can't be voted out of office.
Do you yet have any evidence? What, if any, evidence have you seen?
I can tell you, based on my reporting, we only have reports so far of these machines being removed.
You want to look at where those machines were taken down. What precincts were these machines taken down?
How many mailboxes were removed? Where are the mail sorting machines? What did you replace them with? Are they being replaced?
We're on to everything he's doing.
All of this seems perfectly planned to disenfranchise people.
That's absolutely what this is.
I mean, it's incredibly widespread. It's affecting every single region of the country.
If he does not win, he's going to say that it was a fraudulent election.
It is a massive effort at voter suppression in front of our eyes.
And quite frankly, if you keep this slowdown happening, people will die.
Talking about mortality because of this postal crisis.
He is, in effect, putting his knee on the neck of American democracy.
This will be the shame of the Republican Party for generations.
This is a crisis.
It's shocking.
It is terrifying.
It's absolutely disgusting.
It's personal. I mean, I started writing, I was writing all these thank you notes when the show started. And I've got people now who just got them. I've been on for 4 weeks.
They say this is normal business procedure, that these machines are being removed and reallocated.
In a statement to NBC News, the Postal Service, with a straight face, has described this move as normal business adjustments. Normal business adjustments.
No government agency has jurisdiction over the truth.
This is the sickness that is being promoted by the media. I don't know why anybody would believe Brian Williams. I mean, he's been caught in lie after lie. I mean, blatant lies. Why would anybody believe anything? Why is this guy even on the air? I mean, do people have that short of a memory?
Yeah, I'm really wondering who is doing the scripting on this. Was it Al Gore that was saying Trump had his knee on the neck of democracy or something? It corresponded, of course, to that
George Floyd, which itself was a lie, because that officer did not kill George Floyd. George Floyd overdosed on fentanyl, and he was already complaining that he couldn't breathe, and they didn't release those videos because they wanted the uprising. They wanted to foment violence and civil unrest. So they're the ones that were fanning the flames. George Floyd was being restrained because George Floyd was resisting arrest for a crime that he committed. That's what happened. And he was already complaining that he couldn't breathe because he had so much fentanyl in his system that he would have died anyway. But the truth doesn't matter to these people. Now, one thing I think Trump is aware of some of what's going on. I think he's not a stupid man. I don't know how much he's aware that they plan on trying to overthrow him in the election? I suspect he probably is. But he did an interview with Laura Ingraham on Fox News. He commented on the Black Lives Matter movement and investigations that are ongoing. He says that the Justice Department is investigating a lot of this stuff, and he wouldn't comment on certain specifics. But I think some of what he has to say is very interesting.
I think they're just thugs. I don't think it may be an ideology and it may not. It is an ideology for the people that are paying them. And the funny thing is, and the strange thing is, the people that are paying them and all this money, because somebody's doing
what
it.
What about the corporations?
They travel. Well, wait.
Okay, and I thought it was very interesting. He's talking about the people that are paying them, talking about the rioters, the looters, the violent mobs of people. He's talking about the people that are paying her. Immediately, Laura Ingraham jumps not to the billionaires, but to the corporations. It's kind of interesting. She sounded like she's running interference there. Whoops.
Because somebody's doing
what
it.
What about the corporations?
They travel. Well, wait. The people paying them, those people will be overthrown. Their lives will be taken away. Their lives will be endangered. They're all going to be gone. They're just stupid, foolish people that made a lot of money.
But corporations have given an enormous amount of money, in the tens of millions or maybe hundreds of millions, to Black Lives Matter.
Because they're weak.
Which is all over a lot of these protests. So what does that mean about these corporations? Why are they paying that money out, Mr.
Because
President?
they're weak people. Led by weak people, in many cases, not all corporations.
What does that mean, they're weak
I looked
people?
at numbers where one company is giving hundreds of millions of dollars.
When you say they're weak, what do you mean? Explain
because
that.
they just do what's the easiest path. That's not the easy path. That's a very dangerous path. Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization. You remember pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. That was the first time I ever heard of Black Lives Matter. I said, that's a terrible name. It's so discriminatory. It's bad for black people. It's bad for everybody. And all of a sudden it becomes like sort of, although now if you look, it's going way down because people are tired of this stuff, what's going on, the Black Lives Matter. If you look at what's going on with the bats and a lot of thugs.
Running through D.C. last night.
Oh, it's terrible what's going on. But Black Lives Matter came into existence walking down the street screaming, pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon, and that was about police officers. That was representing police.
DOJ's role in trying to really hit the law enforcement accelerator here against these groups. A lot of the individuals coming into Wisconsin have been tracked as out-of-staters, the ones who've been arrested.
We have them all.
Can DOJ do more, and what could they do to really start putting the fear of God in these violent, not the peaceful protesters, but violent protesters?
So they have under investigation a lot. In fact, I'll show you. I just had this because of this very important interview with you. But I just, and I'll give this to you. In Kansas City, violence has decreased by a third since the initiative began. In Indianapolis, 49 guns confiscated. More than 1,000 arrests have been made under the initiative. DOJ is addressing violence and crime across the country. FBI, but you don't read that. The FBI and ATF are assisting the Portland Police Department. But you can't do much when you have absolutely no cooperation.
But if they don't think they're going to go to jail for 10 years for doing what they're doing, then they're going to keep doing it. So how does a Trump re-election calm things down in the United States? Biden says he's going to calm things down. How will a Trump re-election calm? Why? Why won't he calm things down?
Biden won't calm things down. They will take over. They will have won. If Biden gets in, they will have won. He's a weak person. He's controlled like a puppet. So it's not going to be calm things down. It's going to be they will have won. They will have taken over your cities. It's a revolution. You understand that. It's a revolution. And the people of this country will not stand for that. And Biden is, I don't even like to mention Biden because he's not controlling anything.
Who do you think is pulling Biden's strings? Is it former Obama
people
officials?
That you've never heard of. People that are in the dark shadows. People that...
What does that mean? That sounds like conspiracy theory. Dark shadows.
No, and people that you haven't heard of. They're people that are on the streets. They're people that are controlling the streets. We had somebody get on a plane from a certain city this weekend. And in the plane, it was almost completely loaded with thugs wearing these dark uniforms, black uniforms with gear and this and that. They're on a plane.
Where's this?
I'll tell you sometime, but it's under investigation right now. But they came from a certain city, and this person was coming to the Republican National Convention. And there were like 7 people on the plane, like this person, and then a lot of people were on the plane to do big damage. They were coming from
planning for Washington.
Yeah, this is all happening.
But the money is coming from somewhere.
Money is coming from,
how can it be tracked?
From some very stupid rich people that have no idea that if their thing ever succeeded, which it won't, they will be thrown to the wolves like you've never seen before.
What do you think?
So why doesn't he declare them a terrorist group? Because that stops their funding. And the two women who started that group, they are radical themselves.
Yes.
So it's justified to declare the entire group as being a terrorist organization. So why doesn't he do that?
I don't know.
I heard Barr say they're prosecuting them one at a time as individuals. Well, that's stupid. That doesn't stop the funding.
I don't know all that's going on behind the scenes. I was heartened to hear him at least talk about the men in the shadows. And of course, I learned about that interview I already knew the interview took place. I hadn't really watched the interview until Huffington Post came out and said that Trump was, spinning conspiracy theories, and so I thought, well, this sounds good. So I went and made it a point of watching the interview, and it's interesting to hear him talk about the men in the shadows, the very stupid billionaires, as he calls them, and we all know some of whom he's talking about. One of them is George Soros. But there are
Michael Bloomberg.
Undoubtedly others, yes, Mike Bloomberg. And so the question is, why don't? Indeed, why don't? I mean, is there some reason why he can't? Do these people have so much power that literally this overrides the presidency? I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith in William Barr as the Attorney General. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I don't either, because just the declaration of the group as a terrorist group, all that does is break up the organization, the individual, and it breaks up the funding, which is the most important part of it.
The problem is that by declaring them a terrorist group, they're funded by, the activities are being funded by other companies, other organizations.
Well, but how do you stop that? You stop that with the declaration. Anything that they gave before the declaration, well, that's water under the bridge. But they cannot, going forward after a declaration, they cannot fund that group. It puts an end to the group.
But what if you're not talking about a group? You're talking about individuals. And they divorce themselves from a group.
They can be prosecuted individually.
Yes,
but
I know they can.
It's the funding that allows them to act as an organized gang.
Right, exactly.
Racketeering, assassination.
But what I'm talking about is you don't necessarily have to have the group. All you have to have is a crowd, and we've seen there are companies that specialize in rent-a-mob, where you can just pay money to the company, and they'll have people there, and it's not necessarily an organization.
At some point, people have to take responsibility. If a group has been declared a domestic terrorist group, and you go participate in one of their events, you've joined in de facto.
Right.
And if the police round you up when they're rounding up the other members, well, too bad for you. It was stupid to go there.
What if they just change the name? They don't call it Black Lives Matter, or they don't call it Antifa, or whatever. Whatever he's declared. They can just change the name and go under something else.
That's true, but then that's just more racketeering.
They need to strike at the root of this problem, and the root of this problem are these billionaires and their funding. The question is,
yes, exactly.
Why isn't that being done? And I don't have an answer for that. The Washington Post came out with an article, I think it was this week. It was this week, The far-left Washington Post, and this is from Breitbart, blackmailed the country Thursday with a threat framed as analysis that says only a landslide victory for Joe Biden can save us from violence. The Post's piece is irresponsible. And this person writing says, I'm not going to compound those sins by linking it here. The Post's tweet advertising the piece, which I also won't leak, sums it up perfectly. Quote, that the election will likely spark violence and a constitutional crisis. See, they're telling you ahead of time. There's going to be a constitutional crisis. They say, in continuing from the Post's tweet, in every scenario except a Biden landslide, our simulation ended catastrophically. So they're basically blackmailing the entire nation. Only a Biden landslide can save America from a national catastrophe.
Well, the Americans that I know with a threat like that are likely to say, bring it on.
Well,
they're not going to back down because of a threat from leftists.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't. Yeah, we've been talking about how, and Trump made alluding to it. Black Lives Matter, their popularity was pretty high right after the George Floyd thing, and now it's tremendously sagging.
And Phil, to Michael Steele's great point, I mean, this is actually
Washington Post's Philip Rucker on MSNBC.
Borne out in polling data. There's new polling that shows white Americans in battleground states in places like Wisconsin they're not as supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement as they were earlier this summer in the immediate aftermath of the police killing of George Floyd. Now, part of this, and this is just my own opinion, is that Black Lives Matter, that movement is being applied to protesters broadly and inappropriately. And the actual message is being drowned out by people who might be social justice demonstrators, but they're not really Black Lives Matter affiliated. But what is the risk here? What is the political risk for Democrats in a state like Wisconsin?
Well, first of all, Jeff, your theory sounds just about right, because there has been widespread support in this country for the ideals and the values of Black Lives Matter. And it's worth pointing out that President Trump, according to all the polling data in the summer, was very much on the wrong side of that issue. But the fear for Democrats in those upper Midwestern states, in Wisconsin, also in Michigan, and also notably in Minnesota, where my reporting shows some Democrats are increasingly nervous about softening there for Biden. That, of course, is the epicenter of this movement, Minneapolis being where George Floyd was killed several months back. There is concern there that these images and that this law and order message from the president is working to start to pry away some of those white voters. I was talking to Congresswoman Debbie Dingell the other day. She represents a suburban Detroit district, and she said she drives around her district and she has seen a lot of Blue Lives Matter signs popping up in suburban neighborhoods, and that has given her serious pause. And she's been communicating that with the Biden campaign.
So there you go.
It seems to me like Trump really should be goading them on to get them to pull the trigger early.
Pull the trigger early on what?
The unruliness of the Democrat base.
Well, I don't know.
The rioters.
Really, I don't really think he needs to pull the trigger on anything. I mean, this has been going on for several months now.
Yeah, but he could step up the rhetoric.
I don't know. I don't think the rhetoric is that important.
Special operations people, right? They operate at his beck and call, right?
At this point, I mean, as a voter, I'm looking at this situation, and I may not like Trump that well, but I'm thinking I don't want these violent mobs who Biden and all the Democrats would not condemn. As a matter of fact, Kamala Harris, she was off raising money for them. She comes out and says, I'm condemning. I joined Joe Biden now in condemning the violence. But I got tweets from her. She's got.
So I don't understand. Trump can stop that. It's the money that's driving it. He's not stopping it. What does that tell us?
I don't know what it tells us. Honestly. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, Vicky.
In a normal world, I know what it tells us, but of course this is not a normal world, is it?
Maybe he's concerned. I mean, I know he's concerned about getting reelected. At this point, the country is more important than anything. But I think either way he goes, he's kind of screwed. Kamala Harris, on June 1st at 4:34 p.m., I'm assuming it's Eastern Time, says on Twitter, if you're able to, chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota. Okay, that's tweet number one. Now she's saying, on August 30th at 4:39 p.m., I joined Joe Biden in condemning this violence. This cannot and must not be who we are. Americans deserve a president who will heal our country and bring people together, not fan the flames of hate and division.
Wouldn't it be a kick in the pants if Trump was funding them?
Funding the violenters?
Yeah.
I don't think so. That really is a conspiracy theory.
They write scenarios. If you write scenarios, you can write whatever you want, right?
Yeah, if he was funding them, they would be all over that. I don't. Honestly, I don't think Trump's in on this. I really don't, and I don't care. You know, I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm certainly not a Trump defender. But no, I think his hands are tied to a certain extent, because if he does anything, the media is going to be all over it, and he's got to have that. He's got that pressure. He's being pressed on all sides. I mean, I don't think any of us can really imagine. It doesn't
matter. He is, no matter what he does, so doing nothing is not the solution.
Yeah. Well, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's being done, really, the extent of it. I mean, maybe there's a lot in the works. And again, I don't want to sound like a Trump apologist. Axios has a headline, Democrat group warns of apparent Trump Election Day landslide. I'm not going to read the article, just want to point it out. Mediaite says, okay, I already shared that. Let me move on here. There is a interesting article also in the New York Post, Confessions of a Voter Fraud, I was a master at fixing mail-in ballots. They did an interview with a guy who was on the Democratic. He was actually with Bernie Sanders' campaign, and he talks a lot in here about how they go through, and they, especially with mail-in votes can be manipulated very easily. He talks about how the various methods that they used to try to rig an election, and he says it's done all the time. It's done all the time, and the smaller the election, of course, the easier it is to do it. But they were gathering mail-in votes and steaming them open, photocopying them, and sending them back in the mail. So there's a lot of things like that are happening, and he says they need to really get a lid on it. He wouldn't let them reveal his identity because he's afraid of criminal prosecution, of course. But I think he's telling the truth, and he doesn't care who wins in this election, which is why he's coming out now, because Biden wasn't his candidate. Where do you go with this? Oregon Governor Kate Brown was developing a plan to tame the riots in Portland. Her plan included asking county sheriffs to send deputies in to assist. But it's interesting, Vicky, that some of the sheriffs are actually refusing to go in. Here's a report from KATU.
My goal here is to keep people safe and enable folks to protest peacefully throughout the streets of Portland.
Within the last few hours, Governor Kate Brown elaborated on her announcement this weekend for a unified law enforcement plan to help stop the unrest in Portland. The governor says the plan was already in the works before the shooting death that occurred in downtown over the weekend. However, there appears to be some disagreement over the implementation of that plan. Just within the past hour, we've received a flurry of emails into the newsroom from various groups and agencies declining to participate in the governor's plan. The Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police and the Oregon State Sheriff's Association released a joint statement reading, in part, over the weekend, members of our associations were approached to assist with policing in the city of Portland. Unfortunately, due to the lack of support for public safety operations, the associated liability to agencies who would be assisting in Portland, and the lack of accountability for those arrested committing criminal acts, we cannot dedicate our limited resources away from the communities we serve. Clackamas County and Washington County also sent similar statements saying they will provide indirect support, but they will not be sending deputies to help police protests in Portland.
Well, the governor's office responded with its own statement, which reads in part, the governor's plan is meant to allow for this kind of flexibility in supporting each other as we all collectively deal with the difficult situation in Portland. It is up to each county to determine the personnel and resources they have available to volunteer for this effort.
Good for those sheriffs.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I agree 100%.
Yeah,
they're being set up for disaster.
National Guard, really.
Yeah,
and they need overwhelming force to just go in, put a stop to it, and then stay there keeping, while they round up the violent ones, the dangerous ones.
Well, I think the sheriffs know that it's suicide to go in there.
Right, it's a trap.
You're not going to put your deputies in there. If the leadership had taken a firm stand to begin with, had taken a sane stand to enforce the law, none of this would be happening right now. They could have stopped this, and they could stop this if they wanted to. As a matter of fact, Trump has repeatedly said that he is willing to send the National Guard in and help them. He said because of state sovereignty, I can't send them in.
Yeah.
That was the trap originally,
That's a very interesting thing I was thinking about. The National Guard used to be controlled by the governors of the states. When did that change that they became a branch of the military?
I think what it boils down to is who funds them. Who pays the bill. But Trump has said, though, we are willing to offer federal assistance to do this. And what that looks like, I don't know, but all they have to do is pick up the phone and invite them in. And they won't do it because for whatever reason, maybe they don't want Trump to look like the savior, or they don't want to be responsible for looking like they're heavy-handed. I mean, the fact is that this is going to continue. This is going to continue.
So we really do not have National Guard anymore as a function of the state. We have a military branch that is acting as if it's not military.
Say that again.
I said we do not have a National Guard anymore. We just have a new branch of the military who they are presenting as being domestic so that they don't violate posse comitatus. But if they're under the command of the military, under the command of the president, they are a new military branch, and they would be violating posse comitatus.
I don't know that they're under the command of the president. I do know that Governor Gretchen Whitmer here in Michigan sent some National Guard across the lake. Not literally across the lake. I'm assuming they went around the lake. But anyway, over to Wisconsin to help get things under control over there. I don't know. I don't know who's
being Michigan.
Yeah, Whitmer is the governor here in Michigan,
and she sent National Guard to.
That's what I read in the media. Yes,
that's really bizarre.
Sending National Guard, and I don't know if they're Michigan National Guard. That was the thing that was a little bit questionable to me because it's like, who's paying the bill for this? Are Michigan taxpayers paying for the violence in Wisconsin? That doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, that's not right.
So I don't know what kind of arrangement. Maybe I need to look into that deeper.
Well, and I have heard Trump say all she's got to do is ask, and we'll send the National Guard.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's something not right there in that command structure in who really controls the National Guard.
Well, I know that with regard to this contact tracing stuff and the COVID-19 bullcrap, we got to use the National Guard to test people. I know that's a funding. That whole thing revolves around who's going to fund it.
Well, it's not just that. There is an Army command. I don't know, what. I don't know exactly how it works, but the guy who was put in charge of this COVID task force is an Army general over the National Guard office.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't know what the legal structures are, but it seems very much like the National Guard has been federalized, which would make them a military branch under the Army, government. just like the Marines are under the Navy.
Yeah, I know that power struggle has been going on. I seem to recall some stuff from the Obama years, vaguely, where there's kind of a struggle between the states and the federal government over who controls the Guard. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I'm not sure at this point, but I believe the states still control it, but because the federal government controls a lot of the money for it, the states often will ask the federal government whether they can use the Guard, because if the federal government approves the use of the Guard for a particular purpose, then the federal government will fund it for that purpose. So the operation. So I believe it's a funding issue. But anyway, you want to talk about the interview with Seattle police officer Adam Fowler? He was the one that was injured in the riots and was talking about his ordeal, because this leads into the other thing that we wanted to talk about.
Oh, yeah, no, why don't you? Because I'm sure you watched it. I haven't watched it in a week, so.
Okay. This is Adam Fowler. As I said, he was injured in one of the riots, and he was talking about his ordeal in a local television interview.
Yeah, this has been going on for quite some time now, and for the majority of the time, the crowds typically outnumber the officers that are there. And when you have a large crowds that are yelling, it can get pretty scary. Sunday night was really difficult because as soon as we saw the numbers of people that they had, I realized that we didn't have as many officers that they had people. They outnumbered us by quite a bit. As soon as they encountered us, it got pretty scary because they started launching and throwing fireworks at us. And these aren't tiny fireworks. They're not firecrackers. These are commercial grade mortars. These are things that should be launched up hundreds of feet in the air in a safe place to be detonated so they can put on a firework display. These aren't meant for weapons, obviously. So one had been thrown behind me, and when that detonated, it hit me in the back. And then when I went back towards my patrol bicycle, another went off, and the only thing I could see was a bright flash and then a loud bang and what felt like a hammer hitting me in the face. And that's when I got hit. And when I got hit, I lost my vision momentarily. I lost it for probably anywhere from 3 seconds to a minute, and it was just blurry in my left eye. And my first initial thought was that I was like, I'm going to lose my left eye, and it was pretty scary. It's frustrating. I've been in a lot of these protests, but I haven't been hit where I might seriously lose part of my body. Something that might affect my ability to do my job, to effectively take care of my family, and that's really hard. So
he's almost
once my vision
almost ready to cry.
Yeah, he also said his patrol bike.
Yeah, I got that. Isn't that incredible?
Portland is sending out bike patrol.
Apparently
on the streets where there's violent rioters.
Yeah,
sounds to me like he was bait.
Yeah,
in a tank of piranha.
Yeah, I can't believe anybody would be a police officer in that town.
Once my vision came back, I was able to kind of collect myself. I felt blood on my face. My face was really swollen. It swelled up a little bit bigger than a golf ball on the side of my head. And I was able to get treated by fire, and they were able to transport me to Harborview.
Okay, so he then talks about how the police feel abandoned by the city leaders. Duh. And he mentions that they are operating under a consent decree. These are things we've talked about this before, Vicky, and I'm glad you brought it back up again, because people wonder why a lot of this stuff is going on. Aside from the obvious seditionary aspect of it all, this has been a long-laid plan, and I had forgotten that Loretta Lynch was very much involved. How involved she was when she was Attorney General. So we're going to, in a moment, we're going to go back to our own show back in January of 2017, because I want to play, we did like a montage of different clips that we did back then when Loretta Lynch was making her rounds in various cities setting these things up. But first, he talks about how the police feel abandoned in the city by the city leaders, and he mentions that they are operating under this consent decree.
I mean, going back to when Mr. Floyd was murdered, we went through this a period that has never been seen before in the city, and where everybody has been very frustrated, and rightfully so. And we went through several months of just protests and marches, people wanting to be heard, and the Seattle Police Department is very good at handling protests and marches. We have them every day, 365 days a year, every year, and we do a very good job of handling those protests when they're peaceful. And when they become not peaceful is when we start having to do the things to control crowds in different manners. Otherwise, we do a really good job. The protests that have been going on every day have kind of evolved into something different, and those have turned into a lot of riots, and a lot of the stuff that is happening, because we've basically, some of the Black Lives Matter protests have filtered out, or been able to filter out the people that are causing issues, and they're still having peaceful demonstrations and peaceful marches that are going on every day without any police contact and any issues. But we have this separate group now that is every night between, they could range from anywhere from 50 people all the way up to 200 people, and those are the ones that are very difficult to deal with right now. I would say my feelings towards the rioters is not wearing on me. I will always have time for people that want to cause destruction and harm to people living in the city. I will always have time for them. What's wearing is the current political climate in Seattle. I feel isolated. I feel like we're the police department's in on this on their own in the city, and it's a daunting feeling and a heavy weight and a heavy burden to carry when you feel alone in it.
What would you say this department needs? What do you need as an officer? What do you need to do this job?
It's not super simple, but support. I mean, morale is not super great right now. It's pretty low, and a lot of people feel the same way that I feel, and very, very frustrated. And people want to be appreciated, and I came into this department 5 years ago from a different department, knowing that we were in a consent decree, knowing that we wanted reform and a different place, a different type of police force, and I knew that coming here. And that's something that all of us strive for. The city council made the rules, and we said just make the rules, and we'll follow those rules, and we have. And it's just not enough, and we don't know what it is they want, and it just seems like it's very frustrating to deal with.
Yeah, you know what? You can't send social workers in to a violent mob.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. Violence has to be met with violence. And it can be restrained violence, but you can't send sheep into the wolves' den.
Or said another way, you have to meet force with equal or greater force.
Yeah.
And that's not what they're doing here.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about the consent decree, because they apparently, and this is not the first that I've heard of it, but the Justice Department used consent decrees to get agreement on institutional changes.
Right. Yeah. I'll tell you what. We cover this, I think, very well, if we can toot our own horn for a second. I want to go back to Govern America from January 14th, 2017, because you and I were talking about then Attorney General Loretta Lynch running around the country in these major cities, forcing them to sign these consent decrees to implement so-called community-oriented policing. You referenced the social workers. That's exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about community-oriented policing services, or COPS. This program that they're implementing to revamp the police department. Folks, it's a part of the revolution that we're talking about here, this technocratic revolution, because not only are social workers going to be a thing and are becoming a thing more and more, but also the technocratic control grid plays a major part in this. So let's go back to January 14th, 2017, and it's a little bit of a lengthy clip. We'll probably have to cut it off at the top of the hour and go back to it, but I think this is very important. Normally we don't go back to our own show, but I think the clips that we have here, it's important. So let's go back and play this and refresh our memory about what Loretta Lynch was up to with regard to cops. Loretta Lynch has been making her rounds. You know, the Strong Cities Network, they are internationalizing our cities, and they are in the process right now of federalizing our local police. You know, here you have Loretta Lynch entering into consent decrees with cities to basically pull the Department of Homeland Security and the Justice Department into your town and pitch her tent. Here's Loretta Lynch making at a press conference in Chicago.
And on the basis of this exhaustive review, the Department of Justice has concluded that there is reasonable cause to believe that the Chicago Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of use of excessive force in violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. Our investigation found that this pattern or practice is in no small part the result of severely deficient training procedures and accountability systems. Now, as my colleagues will explain in greater detail, CPD does not give its officers the training they need to do their jobs safely, effectively, and lawfully. It fails to properly collect and analyze data, including data on misconduct complaints and training deficiencies, and it does not adequately review use of force incidents to determine whether force was appropriate or lawful, or whether the use of force could have been avoided altogether. All of these issues are compounded by poor supervision and oversight, leading to low officer morale and an erosion in officer accountability. Under the leadership of Mayor Emanuel and Superintendent Johnson, Chicago Police Department has taken a number of encouraging steps to improve oversight and to encourage community-oriented policing. But our report makes clear that there is still considerable work to be done, work that will require federal partnership and independent oversight. And that is why I am pleased to announce today that the Department of Justice and the City of Chicago have agreed to begin negotiations on an independently monitored, court-enforceable consent decree. And in the days ahead, we will continue speaking to local residents, local authorities, to officers, to ordinary citizens, to gather their perspectives about the challenges facing this city and the changes needed to address them.
Okay, so they're going to be entering into a consent decree, working with the federal government. Now, that was yesterday.
You know what?
Go ahead.
Yeah. What they do, apparently, when they go after police in local police departments, they do it in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. Mm-hmm. So when they take it over...
she had her civil rights officer standing right there. In fact, she spoke at the press conference.
Yes. Okay, now, about a year ago or so, there was a White House conference on combating domestic terrorism.
Okay, I have to come back to today because we are up against the break. I'm going to back it up a little bit and play what Vicky said. All of this is important, folks. We are in a coup d'etat in our country and with the police department. All of it goes in together. So stay with us as we continue here in the third and final hour of Govern America. I don't think anybody else is talking about this kind of stuff. Nobody's talking about consent decrees as far as I know. Anyway,
no, and I just kind of accidentally caught that, you know. It was just kind of weird.
Yeah. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment, folks. Don't go away. Hour number 3 of Govern America is straight ahead.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. New world order. New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order. A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is the third and final hour of Govern America. It continues to be the 5th of September 2020 as we once again document the crisis of our republic, and it is in a major crisis right now as we have deep state shills and technocrats plotting the overthrow of the next election. Plotting civil unrest. We certainly already see that in our country, and also plotting to plunge us into a constitutional crisis. And you know what they say, never let a good crisis go to waste. It's the Hegelian dialectic, once again, ladies and gentlemen, as they are trying their best to foment the destruction and the complete uncertainty in our country and take advantage of it however they can. We're talking right now about civil unrest, but we're also talking about what's the source of it? Where did it come from? How does it happen? And why aren't the laws being enforced? Part of it, I think, obviously, is the fact that we have city leaders and council members and governors in certain states and towns that they want the unrest. But even now, as they are attempting to get things under control because it's not reflecting positively on the polls for the candidate that they choose, they are having difficulty doing it because they don't want to come down too hard. It's just, you know, the statement of Stephanie Rollins Blake comes to mind when she said they give them space to destroy. Well, here it is. Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rollins Blake.
And I've made it very clear that I worked with the police and instructed them to do everything that they could to make sure that the protesters were able to exercise their right to free speech. It's a very delicate balancing act because while we tried to make sure that they were protected from the cars and the other things that were going on, we also gave those who wished to destroy space to do that as well.
That's an incredible admission at a press conference from a major city mayor talking about how we gave the protesters, quote unquote, space to destroy. Now, why would they be light-handed on such blatant criminal and violent activity. Baltimore was one of the cities.
This is where it shows the benefit of researching the history on all of this and going back in time and seeing who did what when and what was done about it. Because with this situation, space to destroy, that's like a setup situation, or sending in a bicycle cop to a riot.
Yeah.
You know, a setup situation where you can then extract a consent decree.
Yes, and that's the whole point. A consent decree is basically a settlement to a court, lawsuit, where the parties agree to a certain settlement. This is a part of the settlement. You agree to reform X, Y, and Z. And in this case, it's reforming the police department and implementing community policing.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? As I was looking at that, I was thinking that has to be how Idaho turned blue and became a liberal state. I know they still have it as a red state, but our legislature is about as blue as you can get without actually wearing the color. But that has to be how that was done, with consent decrees, probably because of that group that was up in northern Idaho.
Yeah. Now, before the break, we played from our own show, Govern America, from January 14th, 2017, where we were talking about then Attorney General Loretta Lynch going around the country in these major cities, forcing them to sign these consent decrees, and I might add, Baltimore was one of those cities that was under that. So that clears things up a little bit with regard to why Stephanie Rollins Blake, who, by the way, was on Obama's board or whatever, the panel that was involved in getting the community policing plan. They had a community policing commission or something during the Obama administration. Stephanie Rollins Blake was on that commission. So just an important side note. But anyway, I want to go and continue playing from our own show here, January 14th, 2017, because some of the other things that we played were important. And before the break, Vicky was about to say something important.
What they do, apparently, when they go after police in local police departments, they do it in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. Mm-hmm. So when they take it over,
she had her civil rights officer standing right there. In fact, she spoke at the press conference.
Yes. Okay, now, about a year ago or so, there was a White House conference on combating domestic terrorism. And I have a clip of that on my YouTube channel. What they're doing is when they take over a management of a police department, that's when Muslims actually are inserted into the police department under the community policing program. In combating terrorism, and this was connected to the Strong Cities initiative, by the way, and community policing. And so what the Civil Rights Commission does is they take a look at the makeup of the police department, and they add Muslims into the police department under the community policing model because they say they have to have the trust of the community to combat terrorism. Well, what they're doing is injecting terrorism into our law enforcement layers of government.
That's very important. Yeah,
it is hugely important.
It is consistent with everything else they've done. Now, that was Chicago. That was yesterday. Okay? Now, as I said, she's been busy because she also, the day before, was in Baltimore
doing exactly the same thing.
Over 227 pages, it lays out ways Baltimore police must reform its policing. The consent decree between the city and Justice Department lays out 15 areas of reform, including community policing. The topic of a speech by the nation's Attorney General, where West Side community organizers listened. Community policing is lacking in West Baltimore. It's something you want to see.
Well, it's definitely not there yet.
I am confident that this reform package will create a stronger and a safer city.
Lynch spoke at the University of Baltimore tonight after standing alongside Mayor Pugh this morning to announce the agreement. It will require police adhere to the U.S. Constitution when making stops, searches, and arrests, build on the department's recently changed use of force policies while mandating officers focus on de-escalation, and prohibit officers from using a person's mere presence in a high area of crime as a basis for a stop, one of the key factors in why police stopped Freddie Gray.
The city and BPD will implement comprehensive reforms to end the legacy of Baltimore's zero-tolerance policing.
The decree seeks the changes after a Justice Department August report outlined discriminatory and unconstitutional policing that affected mostly African Americans while disregarding reports of sexual assault and retaliating against people exercising free speech.
Today is a revolution in policing in Baltimore that we hope will be remembered.
The consent decree also requires the city to create a community oversight task force to increase civilian oversight of the department. The next step, a public hearing, which will be followed by the appointment of an independent monitor to oversee its implementation. City officials haven't yet attached a price tag to any of this.
Okay, so it's interesting that they use the word revolution. Certainly, it is a revolution.
That's exactly what it is,
but
because what they end up doing is putting
hearing about this,
Soviet.
Vicky, I wanted to learn more about these consent decrees. You know, I did a little research on this because since they're talking about it, I think this is important. I don't think this gets enough airplay. I don't think enough people are talking about these consent decrees. And so I found a video by Senator Jeff Sessions I wanted to share with you.
Consent decrees are not often discussed in the public domain, but a consent decree is a powerful act that's anti-democratic in so many different ways. It occurs when a representative of a state body, for example, agrees to bind future governors, future legislatures, override state law, override state constitutions for indefinite periods of time. It should not be taken lightly. But these decrees, once entered, are very, very difficult to change. Now, it's one thing if a private corporation agrees to fund for 20 years this or that program as a part of a settlement of a lawsuit. But when an attorney general or a governor or some other state official agrees as part of a lawsuit to do something over many years in the future, they are binding the people of the state, the people of the United States. They're binding the legislatures of that state and future governors. This is a matter of real constitutional importance.
I also came across a Professor Mike DeBow, who is with the Cumberland Law School, and he had a very interesting explanation.
A consent decree is simply a document that ends a lawsuit by way of settlement. There are consent decrees entered in any number of lawsuits every day. They're very common occurrences. Most lawsuits settle, and a lot of them have written decrees that set out the terms of the settlement. The type of consent decree we're concerned about in the paper, though, is a consent decree used in a kind of litigation called institutional reform litigation. These were lawsuits that began to be brought in the mid and late 1960s by different sort of activist groups that were trying to, say, reform prison, the management of prisons or the management of mental health facilities. There are hundreds of these decrees that have been entered around the country with regard to prisons, with regard to schools, with regard to environmental protection, with regard to services to low-income or mentally handicapped populations, consent decrees about state governments and Medicaid and the Social Security Act. So the consent decrees we looked at were the ones that confine the state government's ability
to set policy and conduct the business of state agencies and subject that to the continuing oversight of a federal judge and the group of litigants who brought the case initially. Sometimes these last for years. They're set up to work essentially indefinitely. And so they can be a very expensive and time-consuming and hamstringing restriction on the ability of the state government to function.
I think this is exactly what Loretta Lynch is doing to our cities. What do you think?
That is exactly what they're doing. And the program that I watched on C-SPAN, the White House Summit, that was in February of 2015, and it went on for 3 days. And the city that was the target was Minneapolis. Okay? And if you anybody that wants to know what this is about, what I was talking about, just go watch that summit. Watch the C-SPAN programs on that summit, and you'll see it, you'll hear it.
Okay, we're back to today.
Yeah, and you know what is really interesting is just a couple days ago I watched a video of the mayor, I think it was the mayor of Minneapolis, that was arrested for interfering with a police officer as he was carrying out his duties. And what the police officer was doing was giving a ticket to somebody. You know, and this mayor was acting like a sovereign citizen. You know, attacking the police officer verbally, you know, saying, "What are you doing here? Get out of here." You know, and just harassing the police officer. It was bizarre.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is just very bizarre, and I think it was very interesting how they mentioned. Oh, a couple of things. First of all, I think it was interesting how they mentioned that Minneapolis was a target. You know, because we've seen since then what a huge powder keg Minneapolis has become. Basically, you could call it a war zone. Mm-hmm. But you also mentioned in that clip about how they bring Muslims into the police department. That was the case we were talking, if you recall, about Florida and how they had that. I think it was a shooting event down there. Met one of those mass shooting events, and there was this whole thing that we had done prior to that about the sheriff department. And
that was Broward County, and the Nicholas Cruz. The kid who did the school shooting.
But what the important thing here is we're not just talking about Muslims. And I want to make that clear. Because when you're talking about community policing, you're talking about bringing people who are supposedly representative of the quote-unquote community into the policing department. You know, these are the people that are going to be policing, you know, they're supposedly policing each other, right? So you're going to bring elements of the community in. So in this case, you'd have elements of Black Lives Matter, elements of Antifa. These are the people they would be bringing in this case. So you can replace the word Muslim with whatever fill-in-the-blank group or group of individuals, and that's going to be the standard for the community. Now, how would you like Antifa?
During the Obama administration, their HUD department had a policy of race norming, which I just kind of accidentally stumbled on. But so there was an intentional importation of, quote, peoples of color or different religions or whatever into and what has historically been, you know, pretty much of a white rural state. Mm-hmm. But that was a policy decision for norming the racial demographics. So I didn't mention that to, you know, for racism. Right, it's because it was their policy to do that.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I know you're not a racist. You know, even though everybody would on the left would, you know, that seems to be the favorite accusation at people.
Right, because I mentioned the word.
Yeah, how dare you? How dare you? Well, how dare you mention anything that goes against the establishment narrative? You know, if you do, you're a racist. And that's, you know, they can only throw these words around for so long and then they lose their meaning. They lose the impact. Racism is a real thing. Racial discrimination is a real problem. But today it's being exacerbated by the other side for a political purpose and blown way out of proportion. And in doing so, I would add that they actually disenfranchise people who are real victims of racism and discrimination.
Yes, they absolutely do.
Because they're diluting the meaning of all of it. But with that as background, and I hated to play such a long clip from our past show, but I thought it was very germane to what's going on today, Vicky. But with that as background, here's Christina Bobb of One American News. She starts off talking about Joe Biden as a presidential candidate and why he was just a puppet, very much similar to what Trump said earlier, and how the Democratic Party has been hijacked and who's pulling the strings.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. Joe Biden is not the Democrat candidate. He's the D.C. establishment candidate. Real American Democrats, those who chose the party based on policy, have had their party hijacked. There is no real Democrat on the ticket. Joe Biden is senile and cannot function at an average capacity, let alone run the country. He's a prop. So who are Biden's handlers? Well, there's a few, but let's talk about one. Tom Perez is the chair of the DNC. He's an attorney who served in the Obama administration as the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. In 2010, Perez led an investigation into excessive use of force by the Seattle Police Department. At the direction of Perez, Seattle was required to restructure their police department to minimize their use of force. Perez neutered Seattle's police department. He wants to do the same thing across the country. Look at Seattle today. It's chaos. And their black female police chief recently resigned because she was prevented from doing her job. This isn't about race. Perez also investigated Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Maricopa County, Arizona. For the first time in our nation's history, the federal government sued a local law enforcement agency claiming discriminatory practices and attempting to dictate local operating procedures within the sheriff's office. Make no mistake, Perez, the DNC chair, is anti-law enforcement. He aggressively attacks police departments and tries to remove the police's ability to protect its citizens. Look at what he did in Seattle. Perez and the DNC are ardently anti-law enforcement. Do you want your community to turn into Seattle? The DNC is pushing aggressively to dismantle the law enforcement across our country. Why do you think the DNC convention avoided talking about all the terrible things happening across the country? They never addressed it. Why? It's what they want. It's about power. If Americans don't have law enforcement protecting their rights, it strips power from the people. This is what I mean when I say Joe Biden is not a Democratic candidate. Real American Democrats do not want the dismantling of their communities. They don't agree with this. We must recognize this for what it is. It's about power. If these leaders can control the votes, dismantle the police, shut down our economy, what's left of our country?
And indeed.
That was excellent. That was excellent.
Yeah, that was one of your clips.
Oh.
So good job.
A good job finding it.
Yeah, good job. But yeah, she's absolutely right. And, you know, it's interesting. I got this whole series of things that, you know, but you know, it's amazing to me how they are trying to turn this around and blame all of this stuff on Trump and the Republicans. It's just out, you know, case in point, Adam Schiff now that, you know, I said earlier they dusted off the Russian meme. Here he is again.
They ought to know that senators like Ron Johnson are pushing a Kremlin false narrative about Joe Biden and doing it knowingly.
Mr. Chairman.
And that information belongs to the American people. It doesn't belong to Donald Trump.
Okay, before we go, I really want to ask you about what's going on in Portland, Oregon. Police say that they're investigating a homicide after a person was killed last night during violent clashes there. It comes, of course, just days after two people were killed in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Do you have any reason to believe that Russia is trying to fuel some of the civil unrest in these cities via social media or other methods?
Well, first of all, Dan, I condemn any of the violence that's going on, and I find it astounding that my colleague in the Senate can't simply condemn this. The peaceful protests, I think, are calling out in a very important way.
Peaceful protests.
The murder of so many black men and women at the hands of police. And
more white people are killed at the hands of police than black people. That is a fact, and even the Washington Post says so.
And those protests are in the best tradition of the United States, but we need to make sure that they're peaceful, as they largely have been, and that there aren't these incidents of violence. In terms of what we can expect from the Russians or what the Russians are doing, the Russians 4 years ago, Dana, exploited Black Lives Matter. They set up their own false flags online to try to divide people along racial lines.
Are they doing it now?
And we have to... they are, once again, doing their best in social media, in their overt media, and other means to grow these divisions again. And I think that most pernicious, we have to worry about they're aggravating these tensions in our cities. We also have to worry about the Russians pushing out the president's false narratives about voting by mail. But finally, on the protest, Anna, I want to...
He says this without any proof whatsoever. You know, it's the same old tired song.
Underscore something that you were asking Senator Johnson about, and that is the president is willfully fanning the flames of this violence. As his own advisor, Kellyanne Conway, said last week, they believe the violence is helpful to them. And the president is only motivated by one thing, what's in it for him. And he sees this violence and his ability to agitate more of it as useful to his campaign. What it does to the country, the loss of life, he doesn't care. 180,000 people have died from the pandemic because of his incompetence and this malignant narcissism. And he simply not only won't act to stop the violence in the streets, but he will try to send federal National Guard forces or others to aggravate it if he can.
So the Guard is aggravating things. This is just mind-blowing, the cognitive dissonance that's going on here.
He will stoke it through his social media where he can because he believes the violence helps him. That is the sad and tragic truth about this, but also about the Trump presidency more generally.
I'm just, this is mental illness.
Yeah. You know
have
what,
to be mentally ill.
Is interesting that as he was talking, he said that it was Russia who was
fanning the flames. Yeah.
Fanning the flames. Well, I've been following the woman called Tori, who did the movie Shadowgate with Millie Weaver. Mm-hmm. And she talked about the establishment of profiles on everybody who is on the Internet, on or off the Internet, but, you know, it's easier to visualize people on the Internet, and them keeping records of everything that you do and analyzing all of the characteristics and attributes of you. Mm-hmm. You know, what makes you mad, what makes you happy, what you like, what you dislike, what position you have on different things, and they use that information.
Right.
And that was the issue with Cambridge Analytica when Trump, after Trump was elected, was the use of this kind of data for essentially what is target marketing.
Yes.
It's the same kind of target marketing that has always occurred, you know, even before the Internet, but it's just that the files before the Internet were not seen and were not known about by most of the people. But on the Internet, you can just visualize how much information they have about you.
Yeah.
But so it kind of seems to me like, since we know that our military is doing that, I have a document, a report that says that the military is doing that as counterintelligence, but it's also counterintelligence works both ways, you know, both inside the country and outside of the country.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to also point out once again, the National Defense Authorization Act 2013
repealed the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948, allowing materials produced by the Broadcasting Board of Governors, to be turned inward, propagandizing the American people by the federal government has been essentially legitimized now. And I think it's important to keep that in mind as we look at all of these things and see all of the insane rhetoric and reporting that's been done across the board. We're living in the age of propaganda.
Well, it occurred to me as I was thinking about all this that the word Russian might actually be a synonym cover name, a cover name for actually what is military intelligence.
Yeah. Well, I don't think Putin...
That's just my thought.
Yeah, I don't think Putin has to do anything. All he has to do is sit back and watch the United States and the intelligence establishment, really, that's running the show of chaos. All that he has to do is just sit back and watch.
He doesn't have... You're right. We're destroying ourselves.
The subversives in our own government are the ones destroying our country.
And they're the ones that want to break up our country. And in a couple of reports ago, you mentioned Cascadia. Mm-hmm. Well, in the regional breakout of the country, the way that they want to break it up, Cascadia is in fact a region that they want to separate from the United States.
There you go. So this plan is going forward, and I think the American people really need to wake up, regardless of which partisan side they're on. Look past partisan politics and see the corruption for what it is. Because it really, as Whitney Webb wrote, it really is bipartisan. It's establishment versus anti-establishment. Those are really the real battle lines, in my view.
Yeah, that's true, because the Republicans were all free trade, open the borders.
Yes, and they still are,
deal
many
with
of them.
Mexico.
They still are. Many of them still are. Mm-hmm. So, I got this whole montage of things that I'm not going to get into, but it's Ted Wheeler, the mayor of Portland. He was at a press conference where he was asked about his role in ending the violence, and it was kind of funny hearing him talk about this.
The constitution of the council is in January. Everything's on the table.
Mayor Wheeler, you mentioned this idea of responsibility. You know, in Portland, the buck stops with you. Do you think you're taking enough responsibility for the violence we've seen due to protests in Portland?
I ask myself that question every day. I go to bed with that question foremost in my mind, and when I wake up in the morning, that's the first question I ask myself. Am I doing everything that I possibly can to end the violence in this community? Am I doing everything I possibly can to hear and understand different perspectives about what people want our community to be and how they want to envision it going forward? Am I doing everything that I can to meaningfully engage the community as we go through this time of crisis together? Make no mistake about it, this is a very challenging time for everyone. There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of fear, there's this is a time when this generation is being called to rise up. And I ask myself, what more do I need to do at each and every moment? And sometimes, honestly, I have found myself coming up short.
Okay, so I'm going to cut it off there in the interest of time. But, hearing him talk about, every day I get up with the question, what am I doing? It reminded me of that Saturday Night Live skit with Stuart Smalley, daily affirmation.
I deserve good things. I am entitled to my share of happiness. I refuse to beat myself up. I am an attractive person. I am fun to be with.
Daily Affirmation with Stuart Smalley. Stuart Smalley is a caring nurturer, a member of several 12-step programs, but not a licensed therapist.
I'm going to do a terrific show today, and I'm going to help people because I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
That's Ted Wheeler.
That's all politicians.
I'm going to help the city. Am I doing enough? I think people like me, but people don't like him. That's the whole point. Not even the people that he's kowtowing to. Not even the riot. They surrounded his apartment.
I know, he's hiding out, I think.
So how is that working out for you there,
He's
Ted?
afraid of the people he was defending.
Yes.
What does that tell you?
Yeah, he was almost mobbed, I guess, as he walked out. He's got this, let's see, he talks about bipartisan cooperation, but they chained themselves together in his lobby. He had ventured out at one point and he tried to join the protest, and then he was confronted by the mob. They surrounded him and called for his resignation. He tried to speak, and they shouted him down, saying "F Ted Wheeler" repeatedly, and saying that he doesn't deserve, to speak. He's a fascist. So, this is the thing, Vicky. All these people that are sucking up to all these lawless terrorists. Do you really think that they're going to be gentle with you because you kiss their hind end? I mean, one of the most telling things that I saw in the way of pictures, which really I think should be an award-winning picture, was the picture of a car dealership inflamed. I mean, literally inflamed. You could see just a few cars on the ground, but in the background there's nothing but fire. But very visible and prominent in the forefront is this sign for the car dealership with the marquee that has the words "Black Lives Matter" on it. Here, this car dealership puts "Black Lives Matter," an expression of support for the group that's burning down their building. There was another one that had something about racial diversity and how we support, racial diversity and black people, and it was a shot there with a sign on the building, and they had all the windows busted out of the place. So,
whenever has appeasement worked? Is there any time in history when appeasement worked?
Not that no. I mean, you meet force with equal or greater force. When there are lawless criminals, you have to stop them and restore order. And I hate to use the word order because it's become such a, since it's been adopted by the other side, new world order. But order means you don't have chaos. And right now what we have in our streets is nothing but chaos. It's astounding.
I
think
going back to Will Roberts, what he said that is, what Compte said is that if they are able to he outlined 3 phases of evolution of society, and we've, as a human race population, have never made it to the 3rd level. But if they can implement scientific management, then we can evolve into this an ordered society, permanently ordered society, because anarchy will not be possible.
Yeah, I'm going to have other things that I'll put in the show notes. One thing that is interesting, though, from the Post-Millennial, new district attorney in Portland admits he's old buddies with an Antifa militant. So there you go. Newly elected district attorney Mike Schmidt, who refuses to prosecute Portland rioters, admits he's old buddies with an Antifa militant campaigning to defund the police, abolish prisons, and demand reparations.
Everybody in Portland better get their guns.
Yeah,
they're on their own. No law enforcement for you.
Yeah, it's interesting that he would even tweet this out. Just before I was sworn in as DA, I sat down with an old buddy of mine, and he uses the Twitter handle at awkward, R-A-P, AWKWORD, for an interview about my priorities as district attorney and rethinking, Vicky, what public safety means. Rethinking what public safety means. That's what he tweeted.
I'd like some clues as to what he thinks rethinking public safety means.
Yeah, there's an interview here, which I'll have to go through
and look at and maybe even clip some for the future show. Anyway, that article and all the associated stuff will be in the show notes. I want to come to your article, the G7 One World, One System. I do have some of the information from some clips from the New America discussion, shall we say? Do you want to get into that?
Yeah, let's do.
Okay. Vicky found a panel discussion from New America Foundation called Transformation, Restoring Resilience. The World Economic Forum, of course, as we know, we talked about, wants to capitalize on the COVID chaos to bring about something they call the Great Reset. Now this New America Foundation calls their agenda the Great Correction. This
not a lot of difference there, is there?
No, it's obviously they're planning on using this. All the globalists want to use this, and we've said before, a lot of real public policy comes out of these think tanks. So the discussion centers around a report they just released called The Great Correction. One of the authors is Dante Disparte, and here's what he had to say.
Remain very optimistic that, like past crises, which created, the global financial system and the Bretton Woods Accord and others that came out of the detritus of the Second World War, I think we need to liken our challenge in this great correction, as we're calling it in the report, as a call to action on marshaling public and private ingenuity, and we've got to innovate our way through this crisis. It's not enough to say, help is on the way. What's become clear is that the very agencies in the public sector that were to respond to this were constrained, and we needed to very rapidly blur the lines of one organization's resource and asset base versus the other. And so if ever there was a case for whole of society and whole of planet resilience, this type of pandemic is it. And it's ironic that it came at the world at a time of national retrenchment and deglobalization, that the world threw a threat our way that would require extraordinary collaboration.
Isn't that amazing? It just happened to work out that way, didn't it?
Yeah, just coincidentally.
We know exercise.
It's not like all the roads aren't converging at the same point and that we can see those roads.
Well, it's not like we can't see that they were planning. Event 201. Let's just go back to that. Microsoft founder Bill Gates and all the characters that were involved in that Event 201 that was happening just before this alleged pandemic broke out. They planned it all, and right on the heels of that, everything just happened to work out exactly that way. And then we also had Fauci earlier saying that, there's going to be a pandemic before this administration's over. Now, how would he know that? Unless he has some kind of crystal ball.
And it's just a coincidence that in the G7 Global Information Society, one of the pilot projects was the Global Emergency Management Information Network, and that was assigned to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So the United States has been doing the Global Emergency Management Planning. And in that article that I told you about with Trump and how he's gutted that whole organizational structure, I found the article and it will be in the show notes.
Yeah, okay, very good. Another person on the panel was Chiara Bronchi of the World Bank. The emphasis is on technology and data. And in this world, individualism, the freedom, they repeatedly bash what they call individualism. Obviously, individualism is freedom, folks, but that's what's being taken down. This is all communitarianism. Everything we're talking about today is communitarianism. Exalting the...
They want to kill the individual.
That's exactly right. And so this notion that the community, we got to do things for the common good, for the community, that is a breaking of individualism, which is your individual freedom.
Now we have realized actually that precisely because of the diversity of our member countries, especially, we're focusing on low-income countries and emerging economies. These are our main clients. We cannot speak of this V-shape in a uniform way. And I can tell you that I just recently looked at some consolidated data for LAC, for the Latin America, which is a lot of emerging economies. And they also struggle, although compared to low-income countries, they are definitely more advanced and with more resources. So I think Dante put the fingers down. There were some preconditions, and some countries are better able to address. That's what we see, that those countries that are able to recover faster out of this crisis had some system in place, a social contract in place, a pretty solid public finances in place, a technical or leveraging ICT systems, so technology and data, but because they have the ecosystem in place and highly educated administration as well to be able to put a rapid response in place. Where we see the struggles is certainly in low-income, low-capacity countries, or in countries that have really founded their society mostly on individualism.
There you go. That's the big stick in the mud. Countries that are founded on the principles of individualism.
And did you hear her talk about the a social contract with the infrastructure to back it up? Of course, she's talking about a system like in the United States. You know, it's all automated and there's money enough to pay for disasters as they occur. She's talking about putting this kind of, the global systems. They're talking about putting this infrastructure in all countries in the world, so that we're all on the same system. Yeah, and that's why you can't have individuals, because individuals don't want to be in a collectivist system. Obviously, where you don't you don't need to think for yourself. They will do the thinking for you. They will guide you. They will do everything for you.
They will control the horizontal. They will control the vertical.
Yep, that's right.
Just sit back and, watch the show. This is Sandy Pentland. He's a professor at MIT. He's a technocrat that is all about sustainable development, and he loves China, by the way.
We're all familiar with the census. Every country has it. Part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is this idea that we should have rich census, that we should be able to actually measure things like the census, but to include things like inequality, like educational level, like sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. And countries are slowly moving to that, but to be able to coordinate both within countries and across countries, that sort of rich census data needs to be everywhere. That's the basis on which you make data-driven, correct policy decisions. Otherwise, you're flying blind. So countries that are doing this well, China's doing it.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said, ding, ding, ring your bell.
Oh, yeah.
The kind of
we got to get you a bell.
Data for policy, for driving policy.
Yeah, there you go.
Otherwise, you're flying blind. So countries that are doing this well, China's doing it pretty well.
Yeah,
we
love China.
Smart city infrastructure, it's a blockchain structure. They have a test pilot that includes something like 150 million people. They have a digital currency they're rolling out. Singapore, the same. And Singapore is moving this to all the countries where Temasek, their investment sovereign wealth fund, operates, which is all around the Indian Ocean. We helped the Swiss nation, Switzerland, deploy this. So this is deployed. This is sort of the early warning. Next month, you're going to see it. Logistics chains based on blockchain to be able to manage all sorts of assets in that sort of fluid way. And of course, that'll spread across Europe, and hopefully other countries will be able to dig in to do this. In this type of economic environment, again, analogous to World War II, World War I, the normal sort of financial engineering, the normal sort of way we do things will no longer work.
So they keep going back to after the end of World War II, and the instatement of the Bretton Woods Agreement, which basically made the United States dollar the world's reserve currency, which is really the reason why a lot of the world
hegemony of the United States has been able to happen is because we've been able to export our inflation to the rest of the world. And
well,
they
needed to do that so that the U.S. could build
empire,
this global technocratic tyranny.
Exactly, absolutely.
And you know who it was that were on the development on the teams for rebuilding Europe? It was the car manufacturers. And why is that? Because of the assembly line process, the ability to think in systems and to regiment process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's what the technocratic world system will be.
I've got one more clip from this conference here. There's Susan Garfield. She is with Ernst & Young, and she is going to talk about track and trace technologies, and again, individualism on the chopping block.
I think we're seeing the breakdown of individualism in conflict with collective good in the context of public health right now. Technology alone can't do it, right? And so I think that's one of the big misunderstandings of innovation, that even as we develop integrated platforms that can share data and create the connectivity between the different stakeholders to solve these complex problems at scale, unless the incentives are there to drive the type of collaboration that's needed, the technology breaks down. And you mentioned data privacy, which is another critical component to gaining public trust. We have a huge trust gap right now that's growing between individuals, especially those individuals that most need are communities of color, those at economic disadvantage. And that trust gap between the people we're trying to help and the institutions that have been developed to help them undermine our ability to leverage these incredible technological solutions. So
incredible.
I think the challenge that I'm seeing in the market, and you mentioned contact tracing, where all of this comes in a very unfortunate case study, where for the first time in history, we now have digital contact tracing, leveraging things like GPS and Bluetooth and proximity monitoring that could actually very effectively warn people if they've been in contact with someone with COVID. But in order for the technology which exists to work, everyone has to adopt it. And then not only does everyone have to adopt it, but they then have to opt in to sharing their private information with the contact tracers, with the public health organizations. And those multiple steps of both behavior change and trust are what's curtailing the deployment of these systems at scale. But it's going to be a big challenge moving forward. And so as we move from this kind of early stage to the middle, which I think we now are in, where testing is becoming more available, we have to overcome challenges of infrastructure tools like contact tracing, and then look ahead to how we're going to ultimately address this and overcome the broader burden of disease with vaccines. That trust gap, I think, is something we all need to consider.
Okay, translation, we have all these great systems, but we just can't get the slaves to voluntarily trust us enough to give up all their data. You know, the unwillingness...
Yeah, right. I'm going to think that a technologist is a humanitarian type person who cares about my health. Really? You know, I don't think so.
You know, if people would just quit being individuals, Vicky, and join the collective Borg, it would be so much better. But this is a huge obstacle, getting people to join the Borg. Why can't people just trust us with their soul?
Yeah, just trust us. Yeah, that woman, she talks about, this highly complex system. And as I was listening to her talk, I was thinking, God, it used to be just so easy in the old days.
Yeah.
I had a doctor. He had his office. I would go in and see him. Yeah. And, he would send me the bill. I had an insurance company. I would send the bill to the insurance company. But the doctor was independent. But they've built this whole massive infrastructure of overhead, technological overhead over the top of our healthcare system, taking it over, basically.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, we're coming down to the end of the broadcast. Your article, G7, One World, One System, there is a number of different themes that you list in here. Global Inventory Project is theme 1. Global interoperability for broadband speed networks. There's theme 3, cross-cultural education and training. Theme 4, electronic libraries. Bibliotheca Universalis. There is theme 5, electronic museums and galleries. Theme 6, environment and natural resources.
This is where we get into the meat. Theme 6.
Environment and natural resource management. Sounds like Agenda 21 to me.
It is.
Theme 7 is Global Emergency Management Information Network Initiative, Gemini. And in that you have a graphic from the webpage, a screenshot, reinventing government, creating a government that works better and costs less. That's according to what they say, certainly not what we say, because it isn't going to work. It's going to work at enslaving the masses and giving you nothing that you have to. It's a departure of representative government. That's the bottom line.
That was a huge find for me, to make the connection between the G7 systems, Al Gore, and the Reinventing Government Project. Because what that says is everything that Al Gore and Bill Clinton did towards reinvention of government was for these G7 pilot systems that are technocratic systems, moving to a technocratic system of governance.
And theme 8 is global health care applications. Theme 9, global government online. Theme 10, global marketplace for SMEs. I'm not sure. Small and medium enterprises is what SMEs are. And theme 11, maritime information systems. So 11 themes coming out of the G7 and now G8, I guess. But the point is,
we don't know how many G's there are.
Yeah, G. That's one thing we don't know.
Because the G20 kind of got ticked off that the G7 was planning everything, and they didn't have a say in it.
Yeah, basically they're just there for the show, essentially. Is there anything? But I encourage people, definitely check out Vicky's latest article. It'll be in the show notes. G7, One World, One System, because she has spent obviously a lot of time.
And it's all real, and they did it.
Yeah, and she's got a lot of external links here where she links to documentation that you could literally, you could spend weeks just going through this one article and looking at all the stuff. How long did you spend putting this together?
Oh, probably about a week and a half. But I already knew a lot of it because I've written about these systems in the past. But I don't know. I found something that that triggered me to do it again and to go over it again and really dive deep. So
yeah,
there's even a link to the United States G7 projects.
Yeah.
It was on the NIST server. NIST managed it, and these are the systems. There are about 10 systems here that the U.S. participated in.
Yeah.
And so I'll be expanding more on those, linking them up to the technocratic systems that I've already documented, like the intermodal commerce zones that I called Trojan Triangles.
Yeah, we have a caller on the line. I'll tell you what, I'll take it real quick if you can be real brief. I'm sorry we haven't had more time for calls, but we're all just about off the air, but if you can be real brief, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Brian in Olympia, Washington. We just had multiple government agencies just assassinate the suspect of a Portland Trump supporter. That apparently shot him, so they found him. You know, if Nikki Rapana knew all of her predictions were coming forward, she'd have a really tough time sleeping at night. It is apparently what is going to happen is what Miles Mathis says. He does not talk about communitarianism. You just brought it up, and good on you, Darren. And Vicky has been talking about it, Mark Windows, regularly, so hats off to both of you. We have to focus on people that are not afraid of saying this word, the Hegelian dialectic. What Miles is trying to bring up, say, is, you know, they're not going to defund the police. They're going to use this problem reaction solution to get more armored vehicles and shoot 'em up technology. It's going to, you know, change my world. This shooting happened yesterday within 5 miles of where I live.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Well, we hope you'll stay safe there in Washington. It's certainly, we're in for a rough ride as a nation. Hey, thank you for the call. I'm sorry we don't have more time. We just had a lot going on today. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We ask that you pray for this republic. Do what you can to restore it. A lot to do in informing our fellow countrymen and women and trying to get people united and understanding what the real plan is, that we're not each other's enemies. We all have a common enemy, don't we, Vicky?
Yep. Yes, we sure do.
All right. God bless you, folks.
They want to take our country apart.
Indeed, and they're succeeding, unfortunately. But we'll join us back here next week, and we'll do it all over again, folks. Always a lot to talk about. God bless you, folks, and we'll talk to you then. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.